He spent his whole life hiding from the world, until one hug made him step into it. Tommy was a 12-year-old boy who lived in a small town, a place where everyone knew everyone, and news traveled faster than the wind. But despite living in a town full of people, Tommy often felt invisible. He had cerebral palsy, which made moving his arms and legs difficult, and sometimes left his speech slow and hard to understand. For most kids, these differences might have been something they could ignore or get used to. But for Tommy, it often felt like the world was rejecting him. At school, he tried his best to join in, but it never worked out the way he hoped. During recess, groups of kids ran around playing soccer, laughing and shouting, forming tight circles that seemed impossible to enter. Tommy would watch them from the edge of the playground, wishing he could be part of the game, hoping someone would notice him and ask him to join. Sometimes he would muster the courage to walk up to a group and ask if he could play, only to be met with awkward silence or a quick no. Go away. The words themselves weren't what hurt the most. It was the feeling of being unwanted, as if he didn't belong anywhere. Even in the classroom, things weren't easy. Teachers tried to help him, but sometimes that help felt more like pity than support. When he answered questions or tried to participate, they would smile and nod, their expressions almost saying, "Good job for trying," but not really including him. The other students would whisper to each other or giggle when he struggled to write or speak quickly. Tommy didn't understand why it was so hard for people to see beyond his disability. He wasn't trying to be different or difficult. He just wanted to be like everyone else, to be treated like a regular kid who had feelings, thoughts, and dreams. At home, Tommy's parents were loving and supportive. They encouraged him to try new things, to join clubs or sports, and to make friends. They reminded him every day that he was smart, kind, and capable, and that his disability did not define who he was. But love at home couldn't shield him from the daily rejections he faced outside. Every time he came home from school with a story of being left out or teased, his parents would comfort him, yet he would feel the same heavy weight pressing down on him the next day. It was like the world had a wall built around him, and no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get through it. Tommy's loneliness wasn't just about missing friends or feeling. Left out it was a deeper emptiness that came from believing that no one could ever truly understand him. He spent hours in his room drawing, creating imaginary worlds where he could run freely and no one would laugh at him. His drawings were filled with colors and characters that moved the way he wished he could. Characters who were brave, strong, and accepted. Through these drawings, he could escape for a little while from the harshness of reality. But when he put down his pencil, the silence of his room reminded him that he was still alone. Even ordinary outings, like going to the park or the grocery store, felt intimidating. People would look at him strangely, sometimes avoiding eye contact, sometimes staring too long. Some would whisper to each other, and Tommy would hear snatches of conversations, words that made him feel like a burden. Over time, he began to expect rejection everywhere he went. It became a pattern, a rhythm to his life. Hope, attempt, rejection, sadness. And though he never stopped hoping that someone might one day notice him for who he really was, the repeated disappointments made it harder to try. Despite everything, Tommy had a spark inside him that refused to go out. He loved stories, especially ones about people overcoming challenges. He would read about heroes and adventurers, imagining what it would feel like to be brave in the face of fear. In some ways, these stories kept him going, reminding him that even though the world seemed harsh now, there was hope that things could change. He dreamed of a day when he would be seen, not as a boy with a disability, but as Tamia, buoyed with dreams, feelings, and a place in the world. Even though he often felt rejected and lonely, Tommy had moments of joy, small sparks of light that reminded him life was worth living. It could be the way the sun shone through his bedroom window in the morning, or the sound of birds singing outside his house. Sometimes it was the quiet smile of a neighbor who waved at him as he rolled past, or the brief, unexpected laugh he shared with a stranger in the grocery store. These moments were rare, but they were enough to keep his hope alive. Like tiny flames flickering in a dark room, life for Tommy was a delicate balance between hope and disappointment. Every day was a test of courage, a struggle to keep trying despite constant rejection. Yet, No matter how many times he was ignored or pushed aside, he continued to show up, continued to try, because deep down, he believed that somewhere, somehow, there was a person who would see him for who he truly was. And he held on to that belief quietly, like a secret treasure, waiting for the day when someone's kindness would finally break through the walls that the world had built around him. Every morning, Tommy woke up with a mixture of hope and dread. Hope, because he wanted today to be different. Dread, because yesterday's disappointments were still fresh in his mind. School was never easy, and each day brought new challenges, new moments where he felt the sting of being left out. Even when he tried to act confident, to smile and approach others, he often found himself on the outside looking in. It was a lonely routine, one that seemed to repeat endlessly. Recess was the hardest part of the day. Tommy loved the idea of playing outside, of running around and laughing with other kids, but reality always fell short. He would watch groups of children huddle together, forming games with rules and inside jokes that he didn't understand. Sometimes, he'd gather the courage to wheel himself over to a group and ask if he could join. The answers he received were usually polite but firm, a soft, no, sorry, or worse, silence. The way they turned away or laughed quietly to themselves left him feeling invisible and small, as though he didn't belong in the world at all. Lunch wasn't much better. The cafeteria was noisy, filled with chatter and laughter. But Tommy often sat alone at the edge of a table, trying to make himself invisible. He would open his lunchbox, unwrap his sandwich, and eat quietly, hoping nobody would notice he was alone. Some kids would glance over and whisper to each other, their eyes flicking to him as if to confirm that he was, indeed, always alone. The whispers weren't mean-spirited, at least not always, but they were enough to remind him that he didn't fit in. He longed for just one person to sit with him, to ask about his day. To treat him like any other kid in the classroom, Tommy faced a different kind of struggle. Learning wasn't easy for him, not because he wasn't smart, but because his body sometimes made simple tasks difficult. Writing assignments took longer, and answering questions aloud was a challenge. Teachers often tried to help, but their assistance sometimes felt like pity rather than genuine inclusion. They would smile encouragingly, but their eyes didn't always meet his. And their words carried the tone of good for trying. That tiny difference made a huge impact. Tommy wanted to be treated like everyone else, not like someone who needed special attention. He wanted to be acknowledged for what he could do, not defined by what he couldn't. Despite the constant rejections and the small moments of embarrassment, Tommy had a remarkable inner strength. He refused to give up entirely on the hope of connection. After school, he often spent time in the library, exploring stories about courage, friendship, and adventures. Reading about characters who faced impossible odds gave him a sense of possibility. If they could overcome challenges, maybe he could too. Even if the world around him seemed harsh. The pages of books offered him a place where he could imagine a different life, one where people saw him, valued him, and accepted him. Outside of school, life continued to be challenging. Simple trips to the park or the grocery store were stressful. People stared, whispered, or avoided eye contact, leaving Tommy feeling like a spectacle. Even those who were kind often treated him cautiously, unsure of how to interact with someone with a disability. The constant awareness of being different made everyday activities exhausting. Tommy had to navigate not only the physical challenges of moving around, but also the emotional labor of facing society's unspoken judgments. It was draining, and yet he kept going. At home, his parents were his safe haven, offering love and reassurance. They encouraged him to talk about his day, to express his feelings, and to hold on to hope. They reminded him that his disability did not limit his worth or potential. But even with all their support, the loneliness he experienced outside the home felt heavier than anything words could soothe. It wasn't that his parents didn't help, it was that the world outside often refused to see him. And that rejection was something they could not fully shield him from. Tommy's struggle wasn't just about loneliness or exclusion, it was about identity. He was learning who he was in a world that constantly told him who he wasn't. Each rejection chipped away at his confidence, making him second-guess himself. He began to anticipate rejection, to expect it even before it happened. This made him cautious, hesitant, and sometimes withdrawn. Yet he never completely stopped trying. There was a flicker of hope, a belief that someday someone would notice him for who he really was, not just his disability. Despite all this, Tommy found small moments of joy. Sometimes it was the laughter of a bird outside his window, or the way sunlight hit the walls of his room in the morning. Sometimes it was a kind word from a neighbor or a small compliment from his teacher. These moments were fleeting but powerful, reminders that not everything in the world was unkind. They gave him strength. Even if it was just enough to carry him through another day of feeling invisible, every day was a delicate balance between hope and disappointment. Tommy had to summon courage just to leave the house, to face the stares and whispers, to attempt connection that often ended in rejection. Yet he kept showing up. He tried to make friends, tried to participate, and tried to be seen, even when it felt hopeless. Deep down, he believed that somewhere there was someone who would look past his disability, someone who would see the real Tommy. That belief was fragile but unbreakable. A quiet ember glowing in the midst of a cold, unfeeling world. Through it all, Tommy was learning resilience. He learned that life could be harsh, but kindness existed too, even if it was rare. He learned that sometimes the smallest gestures, an encouraging word, a smile, a glance of acknowledgement, could have a profound effect. And he held on to the hope that one day he wouldn't be the boy everyone ignored. One day, someone would reach out to him, and his world would change forever. Tommy had always been careful about going out on his own. The streets, the stores, even the small-town cafe where he sometimes went with his parents felt intimidating when he was by himself. People would stare, whisper, or avoid him completely. But that afternoon, despite the gray clouds and the light drizzle, he felt a strange mixture of determination and curiosity. He needed a break from the loneliness of home and school. And something inside him whispered that maybe, just maybe, today would be different. He wheeled himself slowly down the familiar streets toward the local diner, a cozy place with checkered tablecloths and the comforting smell of coffee and baked goods. Normally, he avoided going there alone, worried that people would notice him and stare, or worse, ignore him. But today, there was a pull, a quiet hope that perhaps someone inside might see him not as the boy with cerebral palsy, but simply as Tommy. As he pushed open the door, the warm smell of coffee and fresh bread wrapped around him like a soft blanket, giving him a little courage. The diner was quieter than usual, with only a few customers scattered at booths. Tommy scanned the room, searching for a corner where he could sit comfortably without drawing attention. He settled at a small table near the window, close enough to see the rain falling outside, letting its soft patter calm his nerves. For a few minutes he just watched the droplets race down the glass, trying to forget, even for a little while, the weight of loneliness he carried everywhere. That's when Emily appeared. She was a waitress in her early 20s, with a warm smile and bright eyes that seemed to notice everything around her. Unlike the other adults Tommy had encountered, she didn't look past him or glance away awkwardly. She saw him. She didn't treat him differently, nor did she act as though he needed special attention. She simply approached with the same friendliness she showed every customer, and that small, ordinary gesture felt extraordinary to Tommy. "Hi there," she said warmly. "Can I get you something to drink?" Tommy blinked, a little startled. People usually didn't speak to him first. Sometimes when they did, it was in a strange tone, almost pitying. But Emily's voice was just normal, kind, genuine. He managed a small nod and whispered, "Water, please." As Emily turned to get his drink, she glanced back and smiled. Something about the way she looked at him made him feel less like an outsider and more like a person who belonged in the room. He watched her move gracefully between tables, taking orders, pouring coffee, chatting briefly with other customers, but always with a warmth that seemed to fill the space. Tommy had never experienced someone looking at him like that, someone who didn't see his disability first, but saw him when she returned with his water. She sat down across from him for just a moment, asking gently, "How's your day going?" Tommy's eyes widened. Nobody ever asked him that. At school, he got ignored. In the neighborhood, people barely nodded. And yet here was Emily, sitting with him, talking to him, as though he were as important as anyone else in the diner. He hesitated, unsure how to answer, then muttered, "It's okay, I guess." "That's good," she said, her smile unwavering. "I know some days are tough, though. Want to tell me about it?" Her words were simple, but to Tommy, they felt revolutionary. She wasn't prying. She wasn't acting like she felt sorry for him. She was listening. Truly listening. Slowly, carefully, he began to speak, telling her a little about school, about how sometimes he felt invisible, about how other kids didn't want to play with him. He didn't even realize he was talking so much until Emily nodded, encouraging him with her eyes. Her presence, patient and kind. It was the first time in a long time that someone had seemed to understand him, or at least cared enough to try. He talked about the playground, about lunch in the cafeteria, about the small victories and the daily disappointments that nobody else seemed to notice. And Emily listened, not interrupting, not rushing him, simply giving him space to be heard. As the conversation continued, Tommy felt an unfamiliar warmth spreading through him. It was the sensation of being seen, of being acknowledged as more than just a boy with a disability. He found himself laughing at something she said, a small joke about a customer who always ordered extra ketchup for the first time that day. He felt light. The weight he carried around everywhere seemed to ease, even if only a little. Emily noticed the small tension in his shoulders and, without saying anything, leaned in and gave him a gentle hug. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, just a brief, simple hug, but to Tommy, it felt like the first real human connection he had experienced in years. He stiffened at first, unsure what to do, but soon relaxed, letting himself feel the kindness in that moment. The hug didn't erase the years of loneliness, but it made him realize something incredible, that there were people in the world who could care about him, truly care. After that moment, Tommy felt a shift inside him. The diner didn't feel as intimidating. The rain outside didn't seem so gray. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a world where he could be accepted, where friendship wasn't something he had to beg for, but something that could simply exist. Emily didn't have to change the world for him, just sitting there, listening. And giving him a hug had already begun to do it, as he left the diner that day. Tommy felt a new sense of hope stirring in his chest. He rolled down the street a little faster, a little lighter, as though each movement carried away some of the heaviness he had carried for so long. He didn't know how many more days like this he would have, or if life would continue to be difficult in other ways. But for the first time, he believed that connection was possible, that kindness could exist, and that maybe, just maybe, the world wasn't completely against him. And in that simple act of conversation, a smile, a hug, Tommy discovered something he had longed for all his life, the quiet but powerful knowledge that he mattered. That realization, small as it seemed, would change the way he approached the world from that day forward. The walls of rejection and loneliness that had defined his life for so long were beginning to crack, and he felt a glimmer of hope that one day those walls might come down completely. Tommy could still remember the warmth of Emily's hug that afternoon at the diner. It was a small, simple gesture, but it carried something far greater than words could ever describe. For years he had lived in a world where most people either ignored him or treated him differently because of his disability. That single hug felt like a bridge, connecting him to the possibility of being accepted, of being seen, and of belonging. For days after that moment, Tommy could hardly stop thinking about it. Every time he remembered Emily's smile and the genuine way she listened, he felt a sense of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a strange, powerful feeling, something between relief and excitement. He realized that it wasn't just the hug itself, but the meaning behind it. Someone had acknowledged him without judgment. Someone had chosen to see him as a person first. That simple act had quietly but profoundly shifted how he felt about himself and the world around him. The next time Tommy returned to school, carried a subtle change in his posture and his demeanor. He still faced the same challenges, kids whispering, avoiding him, and the familiar sting of rejection, but now he had a small spark of confidence, something to hold on to during the hard moments. He began to notice small details that he had missed before, the kid who always sat alone in the library, the girl who nervously raised her hand in class, the boy who drew comics in his notebook during lunch. For the first time, Tommy felt that maybe everyone was fighting their own battles, just like he was, and that perhaps kindness could be found in unexpected places. Encouraged by the memory of Emily, Tommy began to take small steps toward reaching out to others. It started with tiny gestures, offering a pencil to a classmate who had forgotten theirs, smiling at someone in the hallway, or asking a question during class. Each time he made these small attempts at connection, he felt a little more confident. It wasn't easy, and not every attempt was met with success. Some kids still ignored him, and a few still teased him quietly, but the sting of rejection was softer now. He had tasted kindness. It gave him a shield against the harshness he had grown accustomed to. Emily's hug also inspired Tommy to explore more of his interests and talents. He had always loved drawing, but he had kept it mostly to himself, afraid that others wouldn't care or that they would judge him. Now he felt a little braver. He began sharing his sketches with his parents first, then with a few classmates who had shown even the smallest interest. Their reactions weren't always enthusiastic, but the act of sharing itself felt empowering. Tommy realized that the world might not always be kind, but that didn't mean he should hide his passions or himself. One afternoon, Tommy returned to the diner to see Emily again. He was nervous, unsure if she would remember him, unsure if the magic of that first meeting could be recreated. But when she saw him, her face lit up with recognition. "Tommy, I'm so glad you're back," she said warmly, as if no time had passed at all. That simple greeting made Tommy feel valued in a way he had never experienced before. They talked about his school, his drawings, and even his dreams for the future. Emily asked questions, listened carefully, and encouraged him. The connection they formed was no longer just a one-time moment. It was growing into something meaningful and lasting. The impact of Emily's kindness began to ripple through other areas of Tommy's life. He found that he was more willing to participate in class discussions, to try new activities, and even to make small efforts to interact with other students. The world didn't immediately become easier or perfect, but it became more manageable. Tommy discovered that a single act of empathy could give someone the courage to face challenges that once felt insurmountable. Emily had unknowingly shown him that being seen and accepted was not only possible, but life-changing. Tommy also began to change internally. He no longer saw himself primarily as the boy who was rejected or ignored. Instead, he started to see himself as capable, resilient, and worthy of connection. The hug had ignited something deeper than confidence it had, awakened a sense of self-worth that had been buried under years of loneliness and doubt. For the first time, Tommy realized that the world's rejection didn't define him. What mattered was how he chose to respond, how he nurtured the kindness and strength within himself. This transformation didn't happen overnight. There were still hard days when he felt invisible, moments when the whispers of classmates stung, and times when his disability made everyday tasks frustratingly difficult. But now, Tommy carried a reminder of hope in his heart. Emily's hug became more than a memory. It became a symbol of what kindness could do, guiding light that helped him navigate the challenges of his daily life. He learned to recognize and appreciate the small acts of goodness around him. Whether it was a neighbor holding a door, a teacher giving him a smile, or a classmate offering a friendly word, Emily's impact went beyond just Tommy's social interactions. It influenced how he saw the world itself. He realized that kindness was not limited by age, ability, or circumstance. A simple smile, a genuine question, or a small hug could change someone's perspective, their confidence, and even their life. Tommy began to look for opportunities to offer the same kind of compassion to others. He helped classmates who struggled, comforted younger students, and shared his drawings with people who seemed lonely or sad. In doing so, he discovered that giving kindness was just as powerful as receiving it. Over time, Tommy noticed that other kids began to respond to him differently. His newfound confidence, however quiet, attracted attention. Kids who had ignored him before started acknowledging him in passing, asking questions about his drawings, or inviting him to join in small activities. He didn't expect everyone to accept him, and he didn't need them to. But the fact that the world was beginning to notice him in new ways was both encouraging and transformative. He was learning that connection wasn't something he had to beg for, it could grow naturally when he allowed himself to be seen. Emily remained an important part of this journey. She never acted like a hero or did anything extraordinary. She simply treated Tommy like a person, listened, and offered a hug when it was needed. That small act became the catalyst for his transformation, showing him the power of empathy, patience, and genuine care. Tommy realized that sometimes the simplest gestures could carry the most profound meaning, and that the smallest moments could change a life forever. By the end of this transformation, Tommy had begun to embrace a new perspective on life. He still faced challenges, and there were still days when he felt rejected or alone. But the memory of that hug and the feelings it inspired gave him strength to face the world with courage. Tommy no longer saw himself as just a boy who was ignored. He saw himself as someone capable of being seen, valued, and loved. Emily had shown him that kindness could break through walls of isolation, and in doing so, had given him the most important gift of all, hope. After that afternoon at the diner, Tommy's life slowly began to change, though at first it was in small, almost imperceptible ways. The hug from Emily had sparked something inside him, a quiet courage and a sense of self-worth that he had never felt before. For years, he had carried the weight of loneliness and rejection, feeling invisible in classrooms, playgrounds, and even in everyday life. But now, he started to notice that the world, while still challenging, was not completely unkind. There were opportunities to connect, to be seen, and to share his world with others. He was beginning to reach for them. At school, the difference was subtle but meaningful. Tommy no longer hesitated as much to raise his hand in class or participate in activities, even when the other kids might ignore him. The first time he asked a classmate a question about a group project, he braced himself for dismissal or ridicule. Instead, the classmate responded politely and even smiled. That simple acknowledgement felt like a small victory, a confirmation that Tommy could be part of the world rather than just an observer. Every little interaction like that slowly built his confidence and reshaped the way he saw himself. Lunch became less of a lonely ordeal. Tommy started to recognize faces that occasionally offered a nod or a hi as he wheeled by. One day, a girl he had noticed sitting alone before smiled at him and asked if she could join him. Tommy's heart raced at the invitation. He welcomed her with a shy but genuine smile, and for the first time in months, he experienced the simple joy of conversation and companionship. It was a small step, but it was transformative. These small moments made him feel as though the walls of isolation around him were beginning to crumble. Tommy also began sharing his drawings more openly. He'd always loved to draw, using it as a refuge from the difficulties of his daily life. But he had never considered that others might appreciate or understand his creativity. Encouraged by Emily's kindness and the growing confidence he felt at school, he started showing his artwork to friends, teachers, and even classmates who had once ignored him. Some reacted with surprise, others with curiosity, but most importantly, Tommy felt proud of himself. He realized that sharing his passions was not only possible, but also deeply rewarding. It made him feel connected in ways he had never thought possible. Emily's impact on Tommy's life extended far beyond the diner. The kindness and acceptance she had shown him became a model for how he wanted to treat others. He began noticing classmates who were shy, isolated, or struggling, and offered them small gestures of support, a smile, a word of encouragement, or just listening to them when they needed someone. It became clear to Tommy that even small acts of kindness could have a ripple effect, creating a network of connection and understanding. He was learning that the same way Emily had changed his world, he could touch the lives of others in meaningful ways. At home, Tommy's parents noticed a remarkable difference in him. He seemed lighter, more confident, and more willing to talk about his day. The long hours of reading and drawing were now punctuated by stories of small victories at school. Moments when someone had acknowledged him, accepted him, or simply smiled. His parents were thrilled, but they also understood that the transformation was fragile and still required nurturing. They encouraged him to keep trying, to keep sharing himself with the world. and to continue believing that he belonged just as much as anyone else. Tommy began to develop friendships that were real and mutually supportive. One of his classmates, a boy named Daniel, invited him to join a small project group. Tommy felt nervous at first, but decided to try. He discovered that he could contribute ideas, be helpful, and even make the group laugh. Slowly, he realized that friendships were not about perfection or fitting in entirely. They were about connection, understanding, and mutual respect. These friendships, however small at first, began to fill a void that had felt unbridgeable for so long. The sense of self-worth that Emily's hug had sparked became a foundation for many other areas of Tommy's life. He began to take on challenges he had previously avoided: participating in school events, trying new hobbies, and even speaking in front of the class. Each small success reinforced the idea that he could achieve more than he had believed possible. He learned to see setbacks not as reflections of his value, but as natural parts of life that everyone faced. With this shift in perspective, Tommy's resilience grew, and he began to navigate the world with newfound confidence. One day, Emily visited the school for a community event, and Tommy had the opportunity to thank her. He told her how much her hug and her kindness had changed his life, giving him hope and the courage to engage with the world in ways he had never imagined. Emily listened, smiling gently, told him that she was proud of how he had embraced his strengths and reached out to others. Tommy realized that the impact of kindness, even from a single person, could last far longer than one moment. It could inspire a lifetime of growth, connection, and joy. As months passed, Tommy became a more visible part of his community. Kids who had once ignored him started inviting him to games or group activities. Teachers noticed his engagement and praised his efforts. Even strangers began to treat him differently, not because of pity, but because Tommy carried himself with quiet confidence and a warmth that invited connection. The world didn't change overnight, but Tommy's world had changed completely. He had discovered the transformative power of acceptance, empathy, and genuine human connection. Tommy's story became a quiet inspiration to others in his town. People began to notice that even small acts of kindness like Emily's hug could ripple outward in ways that touched many lives. His journey showed that loneliness and rejection, while painful, could be overcome with patience, courage, and a single act of compassion. Tommy no longer felt invisible. He had found a place in the world where he belonged, a sense of purpose, and a community that valued him for who he was. Looking back, Tommy realized that it wasn't just Emily's hug that changed him, it was what that hug represented. It was the recognition that he was worthy, that he mattered, and that even in a world that often seemed harsh or unkind, there were people who could see him, understand him, and offer support. That realization fueled the way he lived every day. It's inspiring him to reach out, to connect, and to create moments of kindness for others. His life, once defined by rejection, had been transformed by love and empathy. And he now carried the lessons of that transformation into every part of his future. Tommy's journey was far from over, but he had learned the most important lesson, that change often begins with a single act of kindness, that courage can grow from hope, and that the human heart is capable of connection even in the face of years of loneliness. By embracing that lesson, Tommy was no longer the boy who had been rejected and ignored. He was a boy whose world had been forever changed, and who now had the power to change the lives of others as well.